then realized she commands the SEALs. The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his instructor badge with practiced confidence. At 35, he had earned his reputation the hard way through 15 years of dedicated service, countless training exercises, and 2 deployments that had tested every fiber of his being. His weathered hands bore the calluses of a man who had climbed every rope, fired every weapon, and pushed through obstacles that would break lesser individuals. Marcus took pride in his role as a senior training instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Command. He had seen hundreds of recruits pass through these gates, each one believing they had what it took to join the elite ranks of the Navy SEALs. Most of them learned quickly that belief and reality were 2 very different things. The statistics were unforgiving. Less than 20% would make it through the grueling selection process. As he walked toward the briefing room, Marcus noticed a small crowd gathered near the equipment bay. Their animated voices carried across the courtyard, and he could hear snippets of conversation that made him shake his head in familiar frustration. New recruits always arrived with the same mixture of bravado and ignorance, convinced that their college athletics or weekend warrior adventures had prepared them for what lay ahead. The group consisted of 12 fresh-faced candidates, their uniforms still crisp and their boots lacking the scuffs that came with real training. Marcus had reviewed their files the night before. As was his custom, most were typical. Young men in their early 20s with solid physical fitness scores and varying degrees of military experience. A few had college degrees. Others had worked their way up through the enlisted ranks, and one had been a competitive swimmer who thought his pool training would translate to ocean warfare. But one file had stood out for all the wrong reasons. Sarah Chen, 24 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighing barely 130 pounds soaking wet. Her academic credentials were impressive. A degree in international relations from Georgetown and language proficiency in Mandarin and Arabic. Her physical fitness scores met the minimum requirements, but just barely. What bothered Marcus most was the notation in her file indicating she had specifically requested assignment to SEAL training despite having multiple other options available. Marcus believed in equality and had worked alongside capable female sailors throughout his career. However, the SEALs were different. The physical demands were extreme, the mental pressure was relentless, and the brotherhood forged in combat required a level of trust that could only come from knowing your teammate could carry you to safety if everything went wrong. He had watched too many good people wash out because they underestimated what it truly meant to be a SEAL. As Marcus approached the group, he could see Sarah standing slightly apart from the others. She was listening to a tall recruit named Brad Peterson, who was regaling the group with stories of his football accomplishments and his certainty that SEAL training would be similar to his college workout regimen. Sarah said nothing, but Marcus noticed her eyes. They were alert and calculating, taking in everything around her with an intensity that seemed out of place among the casual banter. The morning briefing was standard procedure. Marcus explained the basic structure of the training program, the expectations for performance, and the reality that most of them would not be standing in this room 6 months from now. He watched their faces carefully, looking for signs of doubt or overconfidence that might predict future performance. Sarah maintained steady eye contact throughout his presentation, asking no questions but showing no signs of intimidation either. After the briefing, the recruits were dismissed to begin their first physical assessment. Marcus decided to observe from a distance, curious to see how the group would perform under their first taste of structured pressure. The assessment included basic exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a timed run around the base perimeter. Brad Peterson immediately positioned himself as the informal leader of the group, encouraging others and offering unsolicited advice about proper form and technique. His confidence was infectious, and several other recruits began to defer to his apparent expertise. Marcus had seen this pattern before. Natural athletes who assumed their previous success guaranteed future achievement. Sarah began her exercises methodically, focusing on proper form rather than impressive numbers. Her push-ups were textbook perfect, her sit-ups controlled and precise, and she approached each pull-up with careful attention to full range of motion. She was not the strongest or the fastest, but her technique was flawless and her determination was evident in every repetition. During the run, Marcus followed in a vehicle to monitor the group's performance. Brad took an early lead, his long strides eating up the distance with apparent ease. Several other recruits clustered behind him, trying to match his pace despite obvious signs of strain. Sarah settled into a steady rhythm near the middle of the pack, her breathing controlled, and her stride efficient. By the halfway point, Brad's early enthusiasm began to show cracks. His pace slowed noticeably and his breathing became labored. Two of the recruits who had tried to keep up with him were now walking, having pushed too hard too early. Sarah maintained her steady pace, gradually moving up through the field as others faltered. In the final stretch, Brad was struggling badly, his form deteriorating with each step. Sarah passed him with a quarter-mile to go, her pace unchanged from the beginning of the run. She finished fourth overall, behind three recruits who had paced themselves more conservatively. Brad stumbled across the finish line in 8th place, bent over and gasping for breath. Marcus made notes on his clipboard, recording times and observations about each recruit's approach to the challenge. Sarah's performance was exactly what he had expected, adequate but unremarkable. She had demonstrated good judgment and discipline, but nothing that suggested she possessed the exceptional capabilities required for SEAL operations. After the assessment, Marcus gathered the recruits for initial feedback. He praised those who had shown good judgment in their pacing and criticized those who had let ego override intelligence. Brad received particular attention for his poor race strategy and his apparent assumption that early leadership would compensate for lack of endurance. Sarah listened to the feedback without expression, taking mental notes but offering no comments or excuses. When Marcus asked if anyone had questions about the assessment, she remained silent while others peppered him with inquiries about scoring and standards. That afternoon, Marcus encountered Sarah in the base cafeteria during the lunch break. She was sitting alone, reviewing what appeared to be technical manuals while eating a carefully portioned meal. Marcus decided to approach her table, curious about her background and motivations. The conversation was brief and professional. Sarah explained that she had joined the Navy to serve her country and had requested SEAL training because she believed she could contribute meaningfully to special operations. When Marcus asked about her realistic expectations given the physical demands of the program, she acknowledged the challenges but expressed confidence in her ability to meet whatever standards were required. Marcus found her responses frustratingly vague. She showed no signs of doubt or false bravado, but also demonstrated no special insight into what she was facing. He concluded that she was simply another idealistic recruit who would learn the hard way that good intentions were not enough to earn a SEAL trident. The first week of training proceeded according to schedule. Physical conditioning sessions pushed the recruits to their limits, with emphasis on functional fitness rather than gym-style exercises. Obstacle courses tested agility and problem-solving under pressure. Swimming exercises introduced the candidates to the aquatic environment that would define much of their future training. Sarah consistently performed at a level that met minimum standards without exceeding them. She never quit or complained, but she also never demonstrated the exceptional performance that Marcus associated with future SEAL operators. Her technique remained excellent, her attitude stayed professional, and her determination appeared unshakable, but her physical limitations seemed obvious to anyone with experience evaluating candidates. Brad, meanwhile, continued to struggle with the gap between his self-perception and his actual performance. His natural athleticism carried him through some challenges, but his lack of mental discipline repeatedly undermined his efforts. He made excuses for poor performances, blamed equipment or conditions for his failures, and showed increasing frustration with instruction that challenged his preconceptions. Marcus began to develop a theory about Sarah's presence in the program. He suspected that her assignment was part of a broader Navy initiative to test the feasibility of integrating women into SEAL training. Her academic credentials and language skills made her valuable for intelligence operations, and her selection might represent an experiment in expanding the traditional definition of special operations capabilities. This theory bothered Marcus more than he cared to admit. He believed deeply in merit-based selection, and worried that political considerations might be influencing training decisions. If Sarah was being given special consideration, or if standards were being adjusted to accommodate her limitations, it could undermine the integrity of the entire program. During the second week of training, Marcus decided to increase his scrutiny of Sarah's performance. He began timing her exercises more precisely, monitoring her rest periods more carefully, and looking for any signs that she was receiving assistance or accommodation from other instructors. What he discovered surprised him. Sarah was actually performing slightly better than her initial assessment had suggested, showing gradual but consistent improvement in strength and endurance. More importantly, Marcus began to notice subtle aspects of her performance that he had initially overlooked. Her swimming technique was exceptionally efficient, allowing her to maintain speed with minimal energy expenditure. Her problem-solving approach to obstacle courses showed tactical thinking that many recruits lacked. Her ability to remain calm under pressure was remarkable, even by SEAL standards. But Marcus's preconceptions remained stronger than his observations. He continued to believe that Sarah's eventual failure was inevitable, and he found himself waiting for the moment when her limitations would become undeniably apparent to everyone in the program. He assumed that the increasingly difficult challenges ahead would expose the gap between her determination and her capabilities. The third week of training marked the beginning of Hell Week, the legendary test of endurance that separated true SEAL candidates from those who merely thought they wanted to be SEALs. Marcus had supervised dozens of Hell Weeks throughout his career, and he knew exactly what to expect. Sleep deprivation, constant physical activity, cold water exposure, and relentless mental pressure would strip away all pretense and reveal the true character of each candidate. By now, the original group of 12 had already lost 3 members. One had sustained a minor injury during obstacle course training. Another had voluntarily withdrawn after struggling with swimming requirements. And the third had been dismissed for attitude problems that Marcus traced directly to an inability to accept instruction. Brad Peterson remained in the program but was clearly struggling with the increasing demands. Sarah continued to meet minimum standards, but Marcus remained convinced that Hell Week would be her breaking point. The combination of extreme fatigue and physical demands would require reserves of strength and endurance that he believed she simply did not possess. He had seen much larger and apparently stronger candidates collapse during Hell Week, and he expected Sarah's smaller frame to become a decisive disadvantage. The first night of Hell Week began with a surprise wake-up call at midnight. Instructors flooded the barracks with cold water, shouting orders and demanding immediate muster in full gear. Marcus watched as the candidates stumbled through their responses, some moving efficiently despite their confusion, while others seemed paralyzed by the sudden chaos. Sarah was among the first to reach the muster point, her gear properly secured and her uniform correct. She had clearly been prepared for the possibility of an unscheduled evolution and had positioned her equipment for rapid deployment. Brad arrived several minutes later, still trying to adjust his gear and complaining about the unfair timing of the exercise. The next 72 hours blurred together in a continuous cycle of physical challenges, tactical exercises, and deliberate sleep deprivation. Candidates were pushed through obstacle courses in the pre-dawn darkness, subjected to hours of cold ocean surf, and required to complete complex problem-solving tasks while exhausted and disoriented. Marcus monitored their progress carefully, noting which candidates adapted to the stress and which began to show signs of breakdown. Sarah's performance remained steady throughout the ordeal, neither exceptional nor inadequate. She completed every assigned task, maintained proper equipment care, and showed no signs of the mental deterioration that often accompanied extreme fatigue. What began to bother Marcus was Sarah's apparent composure under conditions that reduced most candidates to barely functional automatons. While others stumbled through exercises with glazed eyes and mechanical movements, Sarah maintained alertness and situational awareness that suggested reserves of mental strength he had not anticipated. On the second day of Hell Week, the candidates faced their most challenging evolution yet, a simulated combat rescue scenario that required them to work in teams while carrying wounded comrades through hostile terrain. The exercise was designed to test not only physical endurance but also leadership ability and tactical thinking under extreme stress. Marcus divided the remaining 9 candidates into 3 teams, deliberately placing Sarah with Brad and another struggling candidate named Thompson. He wanted to see how she would perform when paired with team members who were likely to become liabilities rather than assets. The scenario required each team to navigate through a series of checkpoints while carrying a weighted dummy representing a wounded SEAL. They would face simulated enemy fire, navigate water obstacles, and solve tactical problems while maintaining the safety of their casualty. The exercise would continue for 12 hours, with teams being evaluated on speed, tactical proficiency, and team cohesion. Brad immediately assumed leadership of their team, despite obvious signs of fatigue and poor judgment. His plan for the first checkpoint was overly complex and failed to account for the physical limitations of his team members. When Sarah suggested a simpler approach that would conserve energy for later challenges, Brad dismissed her input and insisted on following his original strategy. Marcus followed their progress through binoculars, radio reports from other instructors, and periodic direct observation. Brad's team fell behind early as his complicated plan consumed time and energy, without providing meaningful tactical advantages. Thompson began showing signs of heat exhaustion, and Brad's frustration with his team's performance affected his decision-making ability. At the fourth checkpoint, Brad's team encountered a water obstacle that required them to transport their casualty across a simulated river while under enemy fire. Brad's approach was to rush across as quickly as possible, but the current was stronger than anticipated, and his poor planning nearly resulted in losing both the dummy and Thompson, who was swept downstream before other instructors could intervene. After Thompson's rescue and medical evaluation, Sarah and Brad were left to complete the exercise as a two-person team. Marcus expected this to end their participation in the evolution, as the scenario had been designed for three-person teams, and carrying the weighted dummy between just two people would be extremely difficult. What happened next challenged every assumption Marcus had made about Sarah's capabilities. Instead of attempting to match Brad's approach or deferring to his claimed leadership, she took control of the situation with calm authority. She analyzed their remaining objectives, calculated their energy reserves, and developed a systematic approach that accounted for their reduced team size. Her plan involved using tactical principles that demonstrated advanced understanding of small unit operations. She identified efficient routes that minimized exposure to simulated enemy fire while maximizing use of available cover. She developed techniques for moving the casualty that distributed physical stress more evenly and allowed for sustained progress over long distances. Most importantly, she managed Brad's deteriorating performance by giving him specific, achievable tasks that played to his remaining strengths, while preventing his poor judgment from compromising their mission. When Brad argued with her tactical decisions, she listened to his input but maintained final authority over their actions. Marcus watched in growing amazement as Sarah's team began to close the gap with the other groups. Her navigation was precise, her tactical decisions were sound, and her physical performance actually seemed to improve as the exercise progressed. She was carrying more than her share of the casualty weight, but her technique was so efficient that she showed fewer signs of fatigue than Brad, who was struggling with even his reduced load. At the seventh checkpoint, Sarah's team encountered their most difficult challenge yet, a vertical obstacle that required them to raise their casualty up a 30-foot wall while maintaining security and speed. The other teams had struggled with this evolution, with one team requiring instructor intervention to prevent injury. Sarah studied the obstacle for several minutes, considering various approaches and calculating load distributions. She then directed Brad to assume specific positions and handed him equipment arranged in a precise sequence. Her solution was elegant in its simplicity. She had developed a pulley system using standard rappelling gear that allowed them to raise the casualty with minimal physical strain while maintaining tactical effectiveness. The efficiency of her approach was so impressive that Marcus found himself radioing other instructors to observe her technique. Sarah's solution was textbook special operations thinking. She had identified the core problem, developed an innovative solution using available resources, and executed the plan flawlessly despite operating under extreme stress and fatigue. By the final checkpoint, Sarah's team had moved from last place to a close second behind the leading group. Her tactical performance throughout the exercise had been exceptional. Her physical endurance had proven far greater than Marcus had anticipated, and her leadership ability had transformed a failing team into a competitive unit. But what struck Marcus most profoundly was the realization that he had been evaluating Sarah using completely wrong criteria. He had focused on traditional measures of physical strength and endurance while missing her exceptional tactical intelligence, her advanced technical skills, and her natural leadership ability. Her smaller physical stature had obscured capabilities that were far more important for special operations success. As the exercise concluded, Marcus reviewed his notes and observations with growing unease. Sarah had not merely survived the evolution, she had excelled at it in ways that demonstrated precisely the kind of thinking and adaptability that made great SEAL operators. Her performance had been superior to most male candidates he had observed in similar circumstances. More troubling was the recognition that his preconceptions about her capabilities had blinded him to obvious signs of exceptional potential. He had been so focused on her physical limitations that he had failed to properly assess her strengths. For the first time in his career, Marcus began to question his own judgment about candidate evaluation. That night, as the candidates finally received their first extended rest period in 3 days, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He walked the base perimeter, reviewing everything he thought he knew about SEAL selection and candidate assessment. Sarah's performance had challenged fundamental assumptions about what made an effective special operator, and he was forced to consider the possibility that his experience might be limiting rather than informing his judgment. When morning came, Marcus made a decision that went against his every instinct. He requested permission to review Sarah's complete military record, including classified portions that detailed her previous assignments and performance evaluations. What he discovered would completely transform his understanding of who Sarah Chen really was and why she had been assigned to his training program. The classified sections of Sarah's military record arrived on Marcus's desk the following morning, sealed in a security envelope that required his personal signature and biometric verification to open. As a senior instructor with appropriate clearance, he had legitimate reasons to review detailed candidate backgrounds, but he rarely found it necessary to access classified materials for training purposes. What Marcus discovered in those documents shattered every assumption he had made about Sarah Chen and forced him to confront the depth of his own ignorance about her true background. Sarah was not a rookie sailor seeking her first taste of special operations. She was a decorated intelligence officer with 6 years of active duty service, including 3 deployments to classified locations in support of joint special operations. Her academic credentials were impressive not because she was a smart college graduate, but because she had used her education to support complex intelligence operations in some of the world's most dangerous regions. Her language skills extended far beyond basic proficiency. She was a certified interpreter who had provided critical support to SEAL teams conducting high-value target operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Her small stature and unremarkable appearance had been tactical advantages in intelligence-gathering operations, where blending into local populations was essential for mission success. Most shocking of all, Sarah held a current top-secret clearance with special compartmentalized information access that indicated involvement in operations so sensitive that Marcus himself was not authorized to know their details. Her request for SEAL training was not the naive ambition of an inexperienced recruit, but a career progression step for an officer who had already proven her value to the special operations community. The final document in her file was a letter of recommendation from Captain James Morrison, the commanding officer of SEAL Team 7. Morrison's recommendation was unequivocal. He described Sarah as one of the most capable intelligence officers he had worked with in 25 years of special operations. He specifically requested that she be given the opportunity to complete SEAL training because her unique combination of skills would make her invaluable for future operations requiring deep cultural understanding and covert capabilities. Marcus sat in stunned silence as he processed this information. Sarah had allowed him to treat her as an inexperienced recruit, while possessing more real-world special operations experience than many of the instructors in the program. She had endured his condescension and skepticism without revealing credentials that would have immediately changed his entire approach to her evaluation. The implications were staggering. Every interaction Marcus had had with Sarah needed to be completely reinterpreted. Her careful observation during briefings reflected professional intelligence training, not rookie nervousness. Her methodical approach to physical challenges demonstrated tactical thinking developed through actual combat deployments, not academic theorizing. Her calm under pressure came from having operated in genuinely life-threatening situations where mistakes meant death for herself and her teammates. Marcus realized that Sarah had been evaluating him just as carefully as he had been evaluating her. She had observed his teaching methods, assessed the quality of his instruction, and probably formed detailed opinions about the effectiveness of the training program. The thought that she might find his methods inadequate or unprofessional was deeply disturbing to someone who took pride in his expertise. More troubling was the recognition that Sarah's quiet competence during Hell Week represented just a fraction of her actual capabilities. She had been deliberately limiting her performance to avoid drawing attention that might compromise her cover or create problems for the training program. Her exceptional tactical thinking during the rescue scenario had been revealed only when mission requirements demanded it. Marcus spent the rest of the morning reviewing video recordings of Sarah's training performance, with his new understanding of her background. Details that had seemed unremarkable now appeared significant. Her equipment maintenance was flawless because she had been responsible for mission-critical gear in combat zones. Her situational awareness was exceptional because she had operated in environments where momentary inattention could be fatal. Her calm demeanor reflected experience with stress levels far beyond anything training could simulate. By afternoon, Marcus had reached a difficult conclusion. He needed to apologize to Sarah for his treatment of her, and acknowledged that his evaluation methods had been inappropriate given her actual background and experience. The conversation would be personally uncomfortable, but his professional integrity demanded that he address his mistakes honestly. Marcus found Sarah in the equipment bay, meticulously cleaning weapons after the morning's marksmanship training. Her technique was precise and efficient, reflecting habits developed through years of maintaining equipment that her life depended upon. She worked alone, as had become her pattern throughout the training program. Their conversation began awkwardly, with Marcus struggling to find appropriate words for his apology. He explained that he had reviewed her complete record and now understood the extent of his misassessment of her background and capabilities. He acknowledged that his skepticism about her presence in the program had been based on incomplete information and unfair assumptions. Sarah's response was gracious but revealing. She explained that she had specifically requested to go through standard SEAL training without special consideration or acknowledgement of her previous experience. She wanted to earn her place in the program based on the same standards applied to all candidates, and she believed that revealing her background would compromise the integrity of her evaluation. She had tolerated Marcus's condescending attitude because she understood that his skepticism was based on legitimate concerns about training standards and candidate assessment. She respected his commitment to maintaining high standards and appreciated his dedication to preparing candidates for the realities of special operations. However, Sarah also made it clear that her patience had limits. She had observed significant problems with the training program's approach to candidate evaluation, particularly its overemphasis on traditional measures of physical strength at the expense of tactical intelligence and adaptability. She suggested that the program might benefit from incorporating more sophisticated assessment methods that could identify diverse types of operational capability. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of receiving professional criticism from someone he had been treating as a student. Sarah's observations about the training program were insightful and well-founded, reflecting perspectives gained through extensive experience with actual special operations. Her suggestions for improvement were specific and practical, demonstrating deep understanding of both training methodology and operational requirements. As their conversation continued, Marcus began to understand why Captain Morrison had recommended Sarah so strongly. Her combination of intelligence, experience, and tactical thinking represented exactly the kind of capability that modern special operations demanded. Her smaller physical stature was irrelevant compared to her proven ability to operate effectively in complex, high-stress environments. The final weeks of SEAL training proceeded with Marcus viewing Sarah through completely different eyes. He no longer worried about her ability to meet physical standards or questioned her commitment to the program. Instead, he focused on learning from her experience and incorporating her insights into his instruction methods. Sarah's performance during final exercises was exceptional in ways that Marcus now recognized as reflecting her true capabilities rather than unexpected improvement. Her leadership during team exercises drew on years of experience coordinating complex operations. Her technical skills with weapons and equipment reflected extensive field use rather than recent training. Her tactical decision-making demonstrated sophisticated understanding of special operations principles. When graduation day arrived, Sarah stood among the 6 candidates who had successfully completed the program. Her quiet pride reflected not just satisfaction with meeting challenging standards, but validation of capabilities she had developed through years of dangerous and demanding service. Marcus delivered the graduation address, speaking about the qualities that made effective SEAL operators. As he looked at Sarah in the front row, he realized that his own understanding of those qualities had been fundamentally transformed by working with her. Physical strength and endurance remained important, but they were meaningless without the intelligence, adaptability, and tactical thinking that actually determined operational success. After the ceremony, Marcus approached Sarah for a final conversation. He thanked her for her patience during his learning process and acknowledged that working with her had made him a better instructor. He admitted that his initial skepticism had been based on narrow thinking that failed to recognize the full spectrum of capabilities required for modern special operations. Sarah accepted his thanks graciously and offered her own appreciation for the training program's rigor and professionalism. She mentioned that her experience as a student had given her valuable insights into training methodology that would inform her future work with special operations units. As she prepared to leave for her next assignment, Sarah revealed one final piece of information that put everything into perspective. Her new position would be as a liaison officer working directly with SEAL teams to develop improved training protocols for intelligence integration and cultural operations. Her experience in Marcus's program had been as much about evaluating training effectiveness as completing her own professional development. Marcus watched her walk away, recognizing that he had been privileged to work with someone whose capabilities far exceeded his initial understanding. Sarah Chen had taught him that true expertise often came in unexpected packages, and that the most dangerous mistake an instructor could make was assuming that experience and wisdom were always immediately apparent. The lesson would stay with Marcus for the rest of his career, fundamentally changing how he evaluated candidates and ensuring that future Sarah Chens would be recognized and appreciated, rather than underestimated and dismissed. His encounter with a rookie who commanded SEALs had transformed not just his understanding of individual capability, but his entire approach to identifying and developing special operations talent.